Magic the Gathering is one of the most complicated TCGs on the market, especially out of the big three being Pokemon, Magic, and Yu-Gi-Oh! It's really interesting to see how an IP or a game itself with unique IPs can succeed in a world where Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon have that historical context, but also have associated games and animes and just a lot of childhood memories for many folks that have followed those games and shows themselves. It's really weird to think that Magic can have that staying power. How Magic, a game coming out of the free time in between D&D sessions, can really strike the hearts and minds of so many TCG players out there. And really the topic of this video comes to me from playing other TCGs and hearing from folks and seeing online posts about how the complicated nature of Magic, where many of us Magic the Gathering players take for granted how we love that complicated nature. We love the stack. We love having options and just outs in any situation and different phases to go through the game. We take this for granted, and we see that in other TCGs, folks actually don't like that. They don't like the complicated nature of that. And with other TCGs on the market, they actually look to take some of the systems that exist in Magic and improve on them. But what I want to do in this video is showcase in 3 different games, in Magic, in Lorcana, and in the One Piece TCG, how the resource system, how the choices that you can make in the game, and how the structure of your game can change based on each game that you play, and how the overall player satisfaction and outcome is very different based on how that game chooses to implement it. And ultimately, I want to try and showcase how, acknowledging my personal bias of playing Magic for 10 years, how that these 3 things coming together in Magic can provide to an overall better experience. And so the length of this video really lends to the fact that I'm actually going to be going through games in each one of these. I'm going to choose some relatively aggro decks or quick games. So you're going to see some very quick examples of all of these, but I'm hoping to highlight all of this. But firstly, we need to go into a post that inspired it all. Really wanted me to get to talk to this topic and bring it to you in the masses. So I hope you'll join me for the whole length of this. And if you want to see more videos like this, leave me a comment down below on what other topics in Magic that you'd love to see me explore. This is a post from the One Piece TCG where the user asked, what is the difference between the One Piece TCG and Magic the Gathering? They played Yu-Gi-Oh! When they were in middle school, so they're familiar with other mechanics. And so far, they've enjoyed playing One Piece and are wondering, what's going on with Magic the Gathering? It seems super popular. And this response here by user Simply Indie says, can't say much regarding standard, but on my side of, kind of the difficulty scaling, One Piece and Magic the Gathering are night and day, which honestly, I agree with. You'll see that later on. One Piece to me is much easier. The interactions are more fluid. It's a faster paced game. Magic the Gathering, specifically the Commander format, is a muddled mess of combos, counter spells, and the game can literally take hours, which is absolutely insane that players are using Commander as a, stake in the ground as to this is what Magic should be like. That's absolutely blows my mind and is not what is happening. But anyway, they played Standard a few times and they don't really enjoy that much. Good thing that Magic the Gathering in a casual setting is pretty nice, and it can be as expensive as you make it, which is completely true. You could be playing decks as cheap as $10 in the Pauper format, or just expensive of tens of thousands of dollars in the Vintage format. Whatever, you don't need to go that far. But really, I think this post is kind of interesting because I feel like this matches the general sentiment that I've heard from players in person when I've went to go play with Lorcana players, play with One Piece TCG players, and talk about some of the gripes that they've had with the various systems that Magic has and where that's led to their downfall. And I think the gameplay that I'm going to show is going to be really interesting to highlight a couple of points. I want to highlight the turn structure. I want to highlight the phases in the game, right? With that turn structure, the combat involved, and the resource system. And I think maybe in future videos, I can go over these more in depth, but let's start off with some Magic Arena gameplay. So hopping into this game right here, we're playing some timeless best of one with Rakdos Sneak and Show. And I chose all of this for a specific reason. So timeless being the big format that all these Eternal players want to be playing. It has some of the most powerful cards in Magic the Gathering's history, has fetch lands, and is best of one because you can only play one round, which is similar to some of the other TCGs that I'm going to show. So let's talk about some of the complicated nature of this. First of all, the mulliganing. Is this hand good enough at all? Honestly, it's best of one. This doesn't win me the game. This doesn't meet my win condition. So I'm going to mulligan this hand. This hand is slightly better. I'm going to keep this hand, drop my Necropotence, put it to the bottom. So mulliganing is different here, right? You don't get only one mulligan. You can mulligan as many times as you want. And now we start going to kind of play here. So our opponent has kept a 6-card hand, and this is some of the decisions. So noticing the phases first, right? So some of the things we take for granted, we have multiple phases. So the first main phase, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a Blightstep Pathway. I want to see what my opponent does, because I know my opponent has Luros. So there's a lot of information here, right? Like our opponent has revealed a companion. I now want to look at their hand, right, to see what they're doing, because I know in a best of one format that they're going to be doing busted things, right? You hyper tune your decks to win early. Now my opponent is playing some type of mill deck, a connoisseur of my own heart. I love this. This is completely random. So in this case, because they don't really have a turn one play here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to take out the Ruin Crab, right? Just to kind of slow them down a little bit here. And the Guild Forcer is going to mill some cards, going to get big. And now what I'm going to be able to do is Thoughtseize them even further. So what I'll do here is look at their hand even more, right? So I get a lot of options here. Thoughtseize, they drew another land. So let's Thoughtseize away the Soaring Thought Thief. Then what we're going to do is we're going to play our land here. Then we're going to play a Ragavan. So this is where things are going to start to get complicated, right? So we now have a creature, right? We are going to be able to attack with it next turn. And this is where the phases start mattering. So our opponent plays a Persistent Petitioners as a blocker. That's the key here, right? So we are attacking our opponent's life total. We are attacking their character. There are no life cards out, and we are working in combat. So now I have to interact with my opponent that way. Now I'm going to play Blackleaf Cliffs. I drew a Necropotence, which isn't ideal, but I can make it work right now. I'm going to Lightning Bolt the Persistent Petitioners, right? And then I'm going to attack them. So notice how in different phases, I can interact with them first, then attack, right? So we're gonna attack right here, hit them. I get attack triggers that now benefit my second turn, my second phase. Essentially, I can now use the resources I've gained through my first two phases to then cast the cards that I need to. So I'm gonna auto pay for this. Necropotence, historically complicated magic card, right? We're just gonna like activate it a bunch of times, right? Like we're just gonna draw a bunch of cards. That's the whole idea of Necropotence. You lose life, your life is a resource, and they concede. And I think this is a perfect way to highlight what just happened. We've essentially played a game, a micro game, where we've hyper interacted with our opponent. We shut our opponent down, right? And we're just drawing a million cards with Necropotence. But you see how through every phase, I was able to gain information actively, then play a creature, then attack with that creature, first interact with my opponent, then attack, then through another phase, manipulate what I've gained, the information and the resources in a second phase. These card games do not be doing that. I also did not draw a land in that last card. My resources are not guaranteed to me, but I can play cards like Ragavan that can provide me with more resources to then play out my spells. Let's see how this differs in a game of Lorcana. So we're now hopping into a game of Pixelborn, right? So Pixelborn is the client, this is Lorcana. And first thing that I want everyone to notice is, again, how similar this is to Arena. So shout out to the coders of this platform. This is actually a free client, not an officially licensed client. And we're playing an aggro deck just to highlight some things. So first thing I want you to notice is how the mulligan structure works. There's only one mulligan, so noting player choices. Now, this hand honestly isn't terrible. What we're going to do is we're going to get rid of these cards. But you're noticing that there aren't really lands. What is our resource system? Well, for those of you maybe more enfranchised Lorcana players, you'll notice that, well, what we're supposed to do for lands is actually take our own cards, ink them, and that is our quote unquote mana, right? And so what we're going to be doing is playing these, this aggro deck where we play these low cost creatures that can then add ink very fast. We want to get to 20. This number wants to get to 20. So you'll notice immediately that you're kind of working with yourself. This game wants to de-incentivize combat in that sense. And so what we're going to do first is, you'll notice we don't need to play our mana or anything first. You already have that choice. In Magic Gathering, you don't need to play lands first, right? So I can ink this, so I can use that to play my land. Then what I can do is ink and then play a card. So I can kind of soft create my own little phases, but there actually aren't any hard stuck phases. I can do these actions on repeat in any order as long as I have the resources to do so. I can only add one land per turn or one ink per turn unless my cards say otherwise, and take the game from there. So right now, my opponent definitely wants to try and stop my board from getting anywhere. And so that's likely what they're going to be doing here, getting into some combat and making that happen. So we're going to just kind of continue that line and just keep on going. So we're going to ink. We're going to ink. Then what we're going to do is we're going to put this card away. We're going to play ourselves another Pinocchio. And then we are going to ready this character. The reason we're going to ready it is because when these characters are tapped out, combat can then happen, attacks can then happen, and that's what's important. That is when the combat is incentivized. It doesn't happen in a separate phase. You'll notice my opponent is adding to their ink, they're casting some spells, they're doing some things here, and they have some cards with rush that can do other things as well. And so this is how we are going to essentially manipulate the game in our favor and win the game. I actually think this might actually end up being like relatively quick. Let's see what happens here. I think what we're going to do is we're going to draw 2 cards first. So again, we don't need to ink first. We're going to draw 2 cards. Perfect. Then we're going to ink a card. And then we're just going to quest and quest. That's it, right? We're at 13 already. We're off to a pretty dang good start. And this is how the aggro deck generally works. So they're going to kind of kill their own creature there. They're probably going to swing Peter Pan into this. Perfect. And then they're going to eliminate their own creatures. So combat is kind of outside of that control. There's no blocking and attacking like Magic the Gathering. Again, no instant speed interactions. I can't do anything. My opponent is off to their whim. I can only interact on my turn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this Arthur. I'm going to ink this away, right? And then pass the turn. The game is going by pretty simply, and I think we can definitely like win this pretty quickly, highlighting the fact that, again, with these aggressive decks, you can still just ignore what your opponent is doing largely instead of interacting, and that's where we lose some of the player choice. You'll notice that if my opponent generally plays a character, if I don't have interaction for that character, I can't combat it, I can't do anything, so I can't stop it from inking. I can't stop them from winning the game. Whereas in Magic, I can have some blocks, I can maybe have removal at instant speed, whatever it might be, and so that is what I lose in playing a game like this. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm probably going to just draw 2 cards, right? Potentially get some characters out. Perfect. And then what I'm going to do is we are going to probably just like quest this away because I got a bit of a plan here. We're going to play this quest here. This allows me to then return this to my hand, gain 2 lore. Perfect. And then again, we are aggroing out our opponent. We are at 16 lore. We're about to get to 20 pretty soon. Now we can play the slow game. The Sorcerer's Spellbook allows me to gain 1 lore per turn, and that is where this is important here. This is going to allow me to bounce some characters to hand. This is going to allow me to quest for 3. Really what happens and what I want to highlight here is if I can get to 17, if I play Pinocchio and they don't have removal, they can't do anything, right? Like they need to have removal. This Pinocchio is going to be untapped. It's just going to be able to quest for 3 and win the game from there. It looks like they're playing some type of location deck, which is perfectly fine. They're not going to go in for combat, which is weird. Okay. I think I just win the, well, I don't just win the game, but I think I do actually. Hold on. We're going to ink this. I'm going to play the Pinocchio. I think we have Xaxes actually. Yeah. So we ink here to 17, select this to bounce. Then what we do to 19 is I then play this Sorcerer's Spellbook. And then you notice here, my opponent can't do anything about this. I've done a series of actions. I have then gone to 20 and won the game. I can then go to a best of 3 match, which is perfectly fine. They've declined the rematch. But you'll notice how throughout phases of that whole thing, my opponent can't do anything. They can't interact at instant speed, but there is a lot of interesting kind of playing your own turn. You can play out of order, but there's no set phases. It's just my turn and my opponent's turn and repeated actions. There's no structure and predictability. My actions are unpredictable. You have to expect like what I have. Whereas in Magic, when you have structured phases, you have predictability. You know, this is when they're going to attack. This is generally when they're going to do this. And at the end turn, they're generally going to do this. Predictability is key. Let's go into a game of One Piece. Now, for all of you followers on the channel, you'll know I'm a degenerate. I'm playing Mill, so of course I'm playing Nami as my leader. So this is another free client. The One Piece TCG doesn't have a digital client at all, and we are generally going to be playing a Mill deck. So this is a hand that I have right now. I don't like this hand, but I only get 1 free mulligan. So I get another set of 5 cards. Because I'm going second, I get to draw a card. You'll notice that you have a max of 10 resources that you can have, and you gain 2 per turn. The first player starts with 1, then gains 2 per turn. The second player starts with an extra card, but then just starts at 2. But the first player gets to attack first here. So I'm going to play out my cards and then just discard some cards that I generally don't like here and pass that way, right? And that is the turn. There's no phases. Again, it's a set of repeated actions that you can do as long as you have the capability to do so, right? That's what the game ends up being here. So our opponent looks like they have the ability to cheat out some cards based on their leader. And that is what's the other part of this game that's important, leaders. So I'm going to actually place these cards at the bottom. So this is where combat happens. So my opponent attacks in, I get to play cards that have counter on it, as you see on the screen here, and then reduce kind of the amount of damage that they're doing to me, counter out some of my cards, and I lose the cards in my hand in this combat. And this is the only phase where I could use these cards that have counter on them. Now, my leader specifically doesn't necessarily want to be attacking, so I'm not doing that. I'm just going to cast my spells and reduce the amount of cards in my deck and just go on from there, go on my merry way. I'm going to pass the turn and let my opponent do what they need to do here. You'll notice that on the side here, when they are going to be attacking me, I only have 5 life. And that's noted on the bottom right of my character, 5 life. There is no 20 counter. It is 5 simple life, and the cards here have abilities when they get flipped up. This is very reminiscent of card games like Pokemon, where you have kind of a stash, and then you're going to be taking from that every time one of your characters gets hit or whatever. So here, I'm actually going to purposely take this hit. And I let this resolve. And now, because I've added this to my hand, this has a trigger at the bottom, which I can then use. I won't be using this trigger actually, to then move forward into combat from there. So I'm going to be able to then use this card. Now that I didn't use the trigger, I can use this resource to eliminate another card and save out of that combat there. And this is really the kind of primary function of this game here. This is how this game is going to pan out. So I'm going to keep drawing cards. And let's see here. I don't think we're gonna move at all from there. There's no combat that we want to take part in. These have abilities when they die, but really we've highlighted the point of this. I don't think I'll be going through this whole game here, but how resources set in stone, and then they're going to be attaching their resources to their characters to increase the power. So your resources also add to combat. That's another interesting thing, but your resources are set in stone. Those are the only things that those resources do for you. They act as mana and resources to pay for your cards, and they can attach to your leader as a secondary form of use, add to your characters as a secondary form of use in that case. So we're going to start by placing cards on top, then going to return those and mill a card. So we're going to block out that combat there. They're going to then attack for some more here. I'm going to take this hit, and then they're going to play another card, which is, not going to provide any trigger. They're actually going kind of crazy here, not going to lie. So we're going to deploy another card and really just take it from there. I'm gonna pass the turn. I'm going to see if we can actually win this. Really, the point of this deck is to mill out your whole deck. You'll notice how I'm essentially stopping my opponent from doing any combat and just drawing through my deck. That is the whole point of this deck, and that is what we're going to do. So we're milling over our cards, we're adding to our graveyard. So there still is a graveyard, still is a deck, but your game is based around your leader. So it's not you as a planeswalker, it is your leader and their life. That is what's going to be working with you in combat here. So this is where things are going to get a little tricky. So they're going to have double attack here. So I'm going to start by placing cards on top. And then I'm going to return those cards, trash that. Now I am empty-handed. So now I have no cards. You'll notice how you have to use your cards as resources like that. All of these cards, you'll notice, have like counters on the side, which you can add to your combat. And so that is ultimately the resource system in this game. I'm actually not going to use... Actually, I think I have to use this trigger. I'm going to use this trigger to bounce that back to their hand. You'll notice how some of my life then can act as resources. So we're going to deploy this card... choose this card, and we're just gonna hyper aggro through our deck here. This card is really gonna help us do that, and we're gonna pass the turn from there. So now we're probably gonna be taking a bunch of damage here. If we lose the game, sure. I was playing haphazardly. It's completely fine. We're gonna resolve that attack, and we're probably just gonna be taking a bunch of damage here. I don't think we win this game at this point, but it's fine. It highlights the point, and that's the idea of this video. Going over some of the resource systems they have, attacking. Again, very much you can do these actions at any point and we are going to use this trigger to then actually bounce this, and then they're going to attack all in with this. So what they can do is they realize that I can only counter out for 1,000 attack. They're going to attach all of their Dawn to this, attack in, right? You're going to see this. So 13,000 damage at me, I lose. That's the whole game right there. Now, what did you think of those 3 games? Very different, right? And I hope you were able to follow in a large sense. We were able to show how you had to use your own cards to generate your resource system in Lorcana, or how the resource system in the One Piece TCG was more so guaranteed for you. Whereas in Magic, you have to meld it into your deck and draw into them. But some of the other cards that you have can add to those resources, like Ragavan. So that is in a way to kind of deter some of the negative aspects of the resource system. And really what I wanted to highlight is, although these games like Lorcana and the One Piece TCG look to simplify some of the phasing that happens in these games, you can see that you lose some of the complexity and the predictability that you get out of these games. Where in Lorcana and One Piece, there are no phases. There's no main phase 1, there's no combat, and there's no main phase 2. You lose some of that predictability in the sense that there's only one phase where you can do combat. There is then a pre-phase where you may prep for combat, and then there's a post-phase where you take advantage of the resources and information gained in main phase 1 and combat 2. Whereas in Lorcana and in the One Piece TCG, you then have to, do your own things on your turn, but you can do it in any order. So it's very unpredictable that way. You don't know how your opponent is going to be sequencing, and you lose some of the interactability that you have with your opponent. You saw in the One Piece TCG that I was playing a kind of deck that was really just playing some solitaire. I was kind of just playing with my own self. I was telling my opponent, you can't hit me. I'm going to play my own cards and mill out my own deck. In Lorcana, you saw that in many ways too, because you can't interact with what your opponent is doing at instant speed. You can have static effects that maybe prevent your opponent, but you saw that in that game, I was just able to aggro out into a billion lore so quick. And unless my opponent had the ability to interact with my board and attack in, had the removal, they couldn't do anything, right? I could have just played out a bunch of cards, waited for them to not do anything, and just quested with them all at once and just won the game from there. And that is where you lose some of these choices. And I think I'm going to go over some videos that I've seen on YouTube later on, react to them talking about this. But it's really interesting to understand how different mechanics and card designs and abilities actually come off of the lack of phasing or due to the phasing that exists in Magic. But I hope that really this video has highlighted a small inkling of why Magic has those choices and can be beautiful in that sense. With the game that I showed you with Rakdos Sneak and Show, even though I wasn't drawing lands, I was able to then take advantage of my opponent's information, manipulate what they were doing at each point, and then choose how they then going to play that game. I was able to take off their kind of turn 1 play. I was then able to take out their turn 2 play. I was able to remove some of the other things that they were doing and then take the game from there. I was able to manipulate my resources that I had to affect my opponent instead of using my resources to better myself. And of course, these are extreme examples in both of these games, but I want to hear your thoughts down below. What did you think about the resource and I guess choice management in all 3 games that I highlighted? Were there some things that were missing? What would you like to see explored more out of this topic? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below.